Wow. I just wanted to let that sit for a moment. Thank you so much, Sxip and Coco, for that piece, for that gift. I've literally listened to this at least a dozen times in the past couple of days. And each time I listen, I find it even more moving, and I find even more in the piece. It keeps revealing itself to me, which is surprising because we've been probably more involved in the creative process in this piece than almost any other project we've worked on. I just checked back, and just over the past 5 weeks, we had about 150 emails back and forth between us and both of you, just ideating and exploring and talking about the ideas. And still, as close as we were to the creative process, I was really surprised by the form it took. So thank you. So I wanted to just frame it. This was originally scheduled to be an in-person event. And I checked earlier, Sxip and Coco were actually scheduled to leave New York to come to Abu Dhabi for the in-person premiere and to start developing the piece and doing the interviews exactly 1 year ago from tomorrow on April 1st, 2020. And in this process, we decided to keep going, a whole lot of risk taking and a whole lot of embracing of not knowing where we would be going, what it would do. So Sxip and Coco, I'm just curious if you can talk a little bit about how this changed your creative process and the impact this had on you as you worked on it.
Wow. Sorry, this is the first time I've really listened to the piece, not on a technical level. And I definitely had tears in my eyes. So a little bit, here's how the piece is so complex to do in a sort of, it requires so much hands-on, like my hands, meaning editing, was on every little vocal moment you heard. There's a big difference. Like when I'm doing the Gauntlet, normally I enter into a society of singers and we do the piece and it kind of takes care of itself in a lot of ways. I guide it, but it's like herding cats. It's like herding the ocean. It's like trying to get streams of water to move in a certain direction. But in this one, like little birds or little plants that I was planting in a garden, I held each piece of sound. So suddenly I got to see the garden, and it's really moving. And
I think that's actually, I think, what is also the difference in the creative process is we got to be much more intimate with the material because we had longer to do it over, and it's such an interesting dichotomy or paradox that we have felt closer to some of the subjects and interview subjects and singers and you, Bill, and Lindsay, and people at the
Chris
Arts Center
Subin
and Chris, and so
Clare.
we felt almost closer to the people working in this process than when we're actually live with people, because there's been so much more time and saturation, and I think that's one of the biggest differences in our creative
And I would
process.
say I always felt like I was failing. The movement interviews that we got in the past were so intense, and sometimes could use one little bit of language. So I always felt like I failed in a way, that I wasn't honoring the movement interviews. In this case, the movement interviews really got used to a new level because we just had more time with the process and we're in a larger conversation. So it's up the bar. Like we had this down so we could do it in 2 weeks. It was a 2-week process, and now it won't be good enough for us or good enough for the communities, because ultimately, if this really works in a way, we disappear when it's done, and it really is the voice of the community. So, and we're part of the instrument that the community plays, and I feel like it's happened here to a larger degree than ever before.
Yeah, another important difference, I think, in like a virtual composition that you sit down and you hear from beginning to end is that there is a beginning, middle, and end, and there is a sense of that. Whereas in a Gauntlet that you would experience in a public place, you might enter, then it's already been going on for an hour, and you walk up the stream and you don't know what part you're going to be in. So in those compositions, we're composing for the idea that like it's a constant beginning, again, begin again, begin again, and there's a kind of, there is an ending, but there isn't an ending also, which and both things have such an important resonance for how how a viewer will experience a work.
Yeah.
And both are beautiful, but this one is, it's been amazing to have like a beginning, middle, and an end.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was at the very first Gauntlet that you did at the High Line, and I remember you walked through it and then you were invited to get to the back of the line and walk through it again. So you just caught some fragments. But I think the two differences for me is, that the ephemerality is really different because now this piece exists. It's a composition. It's going to stay online, but also the intimacy, which I think these things, it's in your head. It's surrounding you. It's so physical, but it's also so intimate. And the Gauntlet, typically in the other versions, one of the aspects of it was the fact that it's public, that you're doing it in Rockefeller Center, you're doing it in the City Opera House, you're doing it at the Cleveland Museum, you're doing it in a huge open space in Norway. I forget where that was, but there's a publicness to that idea, and now there's a privateness to it. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that experience.
It makes me wonder about whether, like, each time we do a Gauntlet, we discover something new, and then we take it to the next Gauntlet. And also being inspired by Theater for One, I'm like, oh, maybe there should be a single singer in a room, and that part of the Gauntlet is how do we create that intimacy that we've learned here and bring it back to the public space. But
I would say that actually the Gauntlet in public space very much foregrounds a private sense of intimacy, even in a huge public space, especially in large cities and things where like the intimacy of your own experience as you go through something. For instance, the singers are on stools, so they're elevated a little bit above you, giving you a sense of like childlike wonder. And you, as you walk through, you are in this kind of very private space that's also very public at the same time, and a sense of sharing it with others. Like everyone's having, Sxip has this great saying that everyone's intimate experience is epic to them. And I think the Gauntlet in public space is a very private experience that you go through publicly, like, or in a public space. And this time, I, especially for this premiere, like there's a sense of that, there's a deep sense of private space because you're with your headphones. And I was interested to see if it would still feel like a sense of sharing it with others. And it does, I mean, it does. It felt like all alone together.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask one more question, and then we're gonna bring in some guests, and then we'll keep circling back and explore different parts of it, and then bring you back and open it up to questions from the audience. So people who are watching, feel free to start thinking about what you want to ask. But in terms of this idea that your personal experience is really epic, and this, especially over the past year where people are in isolation, but we're all contending with these monumental, massive traumas, right? So, we're approaching 3 million people who've died from COVID. People were feeling deeply isolated during quarantine, and there was the effect on mental health. You have the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter uprising, and it's kind of coming back this week with the trial of Derek Chauvin. You've got the issues of like rootlessness and the sacrifices that people make for work or income, or what it means to be separated from your family, either by choice or by necessity. I hear the echoes of Najuma Khanum's paintings and the sort of haunting image of the eyes of the refugees. So with all of these really like massive themes that are all alluded to, how did you, as you're culling through many hours of interviews from about 20 interviews, each one about a half hour long, how did you start identifying what the pieces of text and what the themes were that you're going to put into the piece?
Well, we go through a two-part process. She does the first culling in a way, and then I do the second one. So for you,
I mean, we had identified different things, and I was kind of going through looking for stories of home and belonging, or there was stories of movement and walking or swimming or dancing. There was
we started to categorize what the kind of actions people are suggesting with their language.
And then I think there was like, you know, in the section called tonal talking, which is the movement where you hear all of the stories that, and a lot of the very profound ones that you're talking about, Bill. For that section, like, was really to identify some of like those stories that were like at the heart of every interview, with the moment where someone
every interview had one great story to tell, painful stories often, but one really solid brick of story that you didn't want to tear apart and make into lyrics. You're like, this is a complete action.
Yeah. Many interviews also had more than one story, but there was like, there's kind of there's always like this, maybe it's like an inflection point for someone in their story, their own personal narrative, or it's and so those were kind of put into this this section, the tonal talking section, and that was a way to address both each story as having such an intense and inherent profound value, and then also the overwhelm of all of the stories. Like even when you listed it, Bill, there's a sense of overwhelm of this is happening and that is happening and this trauma and this is going on, and it's all happening at the same time, and it's all like, and like our personal experience is a physical body in the center of it. And like, I think that Sxip's masterfully composed that section to embody that feeling.
Yeah, and I think that in general, Coco is looking through this to find the good stories, the good language, and whatever it's about. And in general, you start to say, oh, everyone's talking about this. Everyone's talking about immigration. In Australia, everyone's talking about the environment. In New York City, everybody's talking about what it means to become a New Yorker. So each region has similar things. And right now, immigration's at every place in the world, how people move. But then each place has its own individual issues. And then you go, okay, this is what they're talking about. And you start to pull out those stories, and you start to say, okay, I'm going to use this language from this person talking about it, and this language from this person talking about it. And then you have to use that instinctive pre-verbal instinct almost to start to pull the threads and tie them together and make what's good lyric.
Yeah, the kind of art in assemblage.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what was interesting is one of the choices we made when we had to postpone the in-person and we were like, do we go ahead or not? Was we want to capture this moment in time, and we don't know what we're going to do with it yet, but we want to capture it. And one of the discoveries that I had, I think the first time that I listened, was that you ended up writing an elegy, right? Like, and in a point where so many people have been lost in so many different ways, and people have not had that moment to mourn collectively. That to me was the driving emotion of this piece. And I know, Sxip, there are pieces kind of throughout your catalog that are elegies, and Coco, I know that you've done a lot of your work in hospice care, and thinking about issues of mortality has actually been a through line in your work in a bunch of different ways. So that was, I think, for me, a really profound feeling. I know one of our next guest, I want to bring her on because I know she's got some time constraints. So I want to circle back to some of these parts of the conversation. But I want to now bring onto the screen Tala Worrell, who was one of the people who were very generous to share her experience and her stories with you. And I know that her words had a lot of impact on the piece. She's a visual artist and an Abu Dhabi native. So if we could bring up Tala, that would be fantastic. And it's not coming up on my screen. There she is. Okay, good. I switched my screen. Now I can see everybody. And I think I have to thank Marriott for calling out the potential for technical disaster tonight as I lost my feed.
Give a blessing.
So Tala, welcome, and thank you for being a part of this.
Thank you, guys.
And I wanna just ask you just to talk about the experience of being in the movement interviews. What are some of your impressions or some of the memories about what it was like to both be sharing your kind of stories and responses in motion, but also, one of the things that happens is each interview subject is also transcribing, witnessing somebody else's interview. So I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about what it was like for you to be on those two sides of this process.
Yeah, first off, thanks Bill, thanks Coco and Sxip it was amazing to hear it for the first time. I was actually reflecting on this and talking to my roommate about it this morning because now it feels so long ago and that interview happened so quickly, and it's kind of made me even think about like the lifetime or lifeline of a work of art, you know, and how long things can take, and just, you know, it's expanded sort of what it could be for me. In the movement interviews, I mean, something that I noticed immediately is that Coco has this incredible ability to sort of create a space where you feel safe to be vulnerable, like almost immediately, and that translated over Zoom, which I found very, you know, interesting, because I think it's like in painting or in your own studio, you work hard to create that space to be vulnerable in front of yourself, but almost when there's somebody else there, there's this feeling that they'll catch you or they're witnessing it, and there's something that made the process faster. The individual that I was recording, I think it was amazing to see how movement plays a role in bodies that have different abilities and interact in spaces differently. And I think he spoke about swimming and his motions for swimming. And I thought that it was amazing to watch him speak, but also try to draw him speak and to like see how his like voice cadence or temperament would change as he was moving. I mean, of course, now I'm curious about like what I looked like in that moment. But so those are some of my thoughts on that experience.
Can you actually explain what you mean about drawing him speaking and what that reference was?
Because I think, yeah, there was a component of the interview where I think the person that was not moving on screen was doing some sort of recording, and I had just chosen, like, in between maybe writing or something, I remember choosing to like draw his movements instead, which it was just one of those like intuitive things.
And now that you've heard it and heard the piece, I'm curious, do you recognize yourself in the piece? Not only your specific words, but like in other people's words? God, what was your response as you're listening to it for the first time?
I mean, my first response right off the bat was like, it just felt like my world was created, in the sense that like English was spoken in all of the different accents that I grew up interacting with the language of English in. And it's so rare that I hear in a piece of sound or a piece of music, you know, English that's like allowed to be left in the accent that it's spoken in by that person. And in that sense, it really created a sense of place for me that was very much Abu Dhabi and my upbringing. And I didn't even realize that was an absence in sound or music or film, you know, any medium that is using sound. I never realized that was missing from it until today. And of course, I mean, I had forgotten what I had said, and then I heard the section that I'm like, oh, without a doubt, that's me. And of course, I saw myself reflected in other stories, and then was very surprised about others. You know what I mean? Like, there were perspectives from within the community that I had never heard before, or just maybe had not had that conversation, which is, of course, amazing to hear. You know, you just never know what people are thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that comment about the accents, for me, when I try to explain kind of what it means to be in Abu Dhabi, and when we talk about this piece as a portrait of Abu Dhabi, I think that all those different cadences and all the different accents is so much part of the experience here. And I'm really happy to hear you reflect on that. I know you've got to go, but Sxip and Coco, you're hearing Adam. You're both in the same room. I'm curious if you've got any questions for one another before we let you go, Tala.
I just want to say that, you know, I feel like if the Gauntlet is successful as a form, it does things that we didn't intend. But to hear that it's like it's the sound of Abu Dhabi as you're growing up with the accents. Yeah, I was like, oh yeah, speak in your own accent. I was like, yeah, speak in your own language. That's exciting. But I didn't understand what that meant. When that decision was made, and that's humbling. It's really humbling. It's really moving.
Thank you guys. I mean, again, like I just want to say that on like a very personal level, that this has very much changed sort of my expectations of like what certain parts of my practice or what my work can do, you know what I mean? And like maybe even an emotional demand from people, a durational demand from the things that I'm engaging with, and like a certain level of sincerity. And so thank you both for
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
allowing me to be a part of it and kind of learn
You've
through
spoken such great, not all not all interviewees are going to speak in poetry and all the language works, but you actually spoke in poetry a few times, and we're like, oh, that's good. So
Yeah, and I know that your artistic process also has an embodied component where you really, use your movement. And we talked a lot in the interview about moving faster than the speed of our own judgment. And I really thank you so much
yeah,
for participating, and I look forward to seeing what comes out of you
what
too.
comes next. Yeah, maybe an in-person hang also when build, maybe it's in
yeah,
we can all
that would be lovely. Yeah,
Yeah, let's
yeah,
do that. And I think it's also interesting that your practice, especially I guess more recently during COVID, has started to embody portraiture as well. And so I see that conversation as well. So
and I want
thank
to
you for
say, you
coming.
saying it's portraiture, I never even thought of that until you said that. I'm like, oh, this is portraiture of community. Duh. Like, I was like, until you said that just now, I never put that in my brain. So yeah.
100%. Well, thank
Great.
you, Bill.
Well,
Thank you, Bill.
great. Thank you so much, Tala. I'm now going to invite the performers up. We're going a little bit through a little bit in the order in which we created the piece. And so now we want to go to the rehearsal and recording process, and turning the interview process and the composing process into a musical piece. So I'm going to invite Clare Lesser, who is a lecturer in music here at NYU Abu Dhabi, and she's an incredible singer, particularly of contemporary music, and the director of the NYUAD Choral Ensemble. I also want to invite up two of her students who sang in the piece, Eliza and Mohammed Albreiki, and invite you all onto the screen. And I'm going to start with Eliza and Mohammed for a moment, and just ask you about first the experience. You couldn't sing all in the same room, right? We're still living under the shadow of COVID. All of your rehearsals were by section. This was the first time you're actually hearing the chorus that you're a part of. So I'm imagining what was it like to kind of hear this chorus for the first time?
I think I can go in on this one. So for me, it was like a huge surprise, especially because as a biology major, I usually go by a very specific protocol. I know what I'm expecting. I know what I'm supposed to get. I know how the finalized product would look like. But with this specific piece, it was a total surprise. I don't think anybody knew from the beginning how everything will look like. And it was even more so a very fun experience and a very interesting experience, just recording your individual piece. We had no idea what other people would sing. And even more so when we were practicing, we couldn't even hear the rest of the people within our own section. So it was really just like a very tiny little bit of the whole gauntlet that we could hear, which was our own part. And another thing that was like also very interesting was to indeed like even continue with the recording without the rest of the choir, which was quite a bit intimidating. And trying to like make a part, like what kind of like feeling should you put in that specific piece? Where would this go? So like, what is Sxip really looking for in the specific piece? It was all like a roller coaster for us all to work together individually for such a complex piece altogether.
Great. And Mohammed, what about you? What was the experience like for you hearing this for the first time?
Honestly, from beginning to end, all I can say is that this was just so very surreal. So it's just from the beginning, just the idea of having the gauntlet and like what it was in the beginning. I was very confused about how it would play out, like at least in the online way, you know? And then I realized that we'd basically be recording all of our parts individually. And that recording session was, again, the only word I can find is surreal, because I'm in this huge hallway. There's the blue hall. I'm in this huge hall, you know, and I'm the only individual in it. And there's just one mic, one laptop, so I can confer with the others, and then I have to perform. And that was such an insane experience, because like I had the pleasure of like singing in this beautiful hall, but at the same time it was just my voice reverberating around the world, and like the only other voice I could hear is through the headphones. And again, like while I was after I finished performing, I was just imagining like how will it actually sound, like will my voice actually be harmonious? Well, there was just so many questions, but to then like listen to all of this and like I like this is music. Like, we created music out of just these few parts, and it made me feel just really really proud of myself and proud of all of this, and like everyone who was a part of this project.
That's great. Well, you absolutely should be. It's a gorgeous piece. And it's gorgeous in part because Clare Lesser, you gave such sensitive instruction to the students as you were working with them. And I know Sxip and I, after every rehearsal, he would send me these notes about how great you are with your students and about how much he loved being in the room. Not often having a chance to be in the room for the process with the singers or meeting the singers before. And I know for you, a lot of your practice is contemporary music. You are often premiering work by living composers that are writing for you, that are working with you. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about what it's like to, in general, work with the living composer and that collaboration with the artist, and how that sort of translated to your work preparing the students for something that clearly none of us actually knew what this was going to be like. I think to Mohammed's point, we were all making this up as we went along. And so, Clare, I'm just going to remind you to unmute yourself, and I would love to hear your thoughts about that.
Well, working with living composers, obviously, because they are all unique, every experience is utterly individual, not only in terms of the whole process, but literally minute to minute, second to second, day to day. Some composers are incredibly easy to work with and accommodating, and I have to say Sxip falls into that category. He's the most accommodating and kindest composer I think we've worked with, and so very, very welcoming to the students. It was a pleasure having him sit in on loads of the rehearsals, and it was great that I could just say, "Hey Sxip, what do you want here? Have you thought of doing this?" In some instances, and he'd say, "Hey Clare, would you think somebody could do something or other?" It was really, really nice to be able to have that immediate back and forth, even though we're on different continents, all three of us. Obviously, he's in the US, I'm in the UK. Most of the choirs are in the UAE. So that was very interesting. It was nice for me acting, I don't know, kind of as a conduit, I suppose, because I'm actually more directing and facilitating, not performing myself. So it was very nice getting to do the interaction two ways instead of it being all focused on myself and my accompanist or ensemble or whoever I'm working with, or working with a conductor or whatever in other professional work. And it was great to see all the individuality that so many of the singers brought to the actual recordings, because obviously Zoom, it's slow. A great deal of it has to be done muted because you have to just get everything learnt. You have to get the material transmitted and learned, and so that the choir can repeat it and they can produce it. But then, of course, I mean, I know all their voices, and it was lovely to hear the actual recording and saying, oh yeah, there's Eliza, there's Mohammed, there's Casper, there's Vera, etc., etc., there's Lily, there's Nicole, so on and so forth, which was great. But in the actual recordings, they brought so much to the interpretative experience, which I thought was great. And Sxip really brought even more out of them, because he was always giving them really good feedback, brainstorming, really, really great person to work with.
And I, one of the things that I loved is after I got to sit into a couple of the rehearsals, and I remember after one of them just sort of being a fly on the wall when you and Sxip were talking about like each singer and the quality of their voice, and that individuality and the sort of the casting and the character of everybody's voice, which again, I think as you said in the beginning, Sxip, most choirs sort of kind of subsume that to the full choir, and hear that individuality came forward.
I'd love to mention a great moment of that, which is when I was editing the voices, and it's at the end of movement 1 of I Am a Foreigner. And I was listening to all this audio, and Eliza was singing in this really strange, fragile voice. And I'm like, this is amazing. And I put it in the piece, and I thought, she's singing so quietly, you don't hear it. I'm like, you know what I'm going to do? Because I had a feeling that the piece ended so grand that it was too grand. I took that little audio and put it at the end. She's the last thing you hear. I'm a foreigner wherever I'm a foreigner. What is the lyrics? Wherever I go. And what I didn't realize is when she recorded that little bit, she had something in her throat and she was singing through it. Because right after that, you hear Clare in the audio going, Eliza, take a drink of water. So it's nothing you do intentionally. And if you tried to fake it, it would sound fake. But it's that beautiful, Coco always says, she has this term, choreography of need, that things are most interesting when you're doing them because you just need to do them. Well, she really was trying to sing through this terrible thing in her throat and made this great vocal quality. So did you notice that in your singing?
I did. And I was like, I thought I had the better run of that part.
But it was, you did. You had a more clear run, but you didn't have a more interesting run of that part. So, yeah, you gave me something I couldn't ask for.
And I think I remember actually writing to Sxip about that moment, like, oh, that moment's really great. I hope that stays in.
Yeah.
So I'm very cognizant of time, and we've got a few more speakers, and I want to open it up to questions from the audience. So I want to thank Eliza and Mohammed and Clare, and I want to bring up Subin Thompson now, who is the sound designer for the piece, and Subin is. He is both he's a theater technical specialist for the Art Center, works with us all the time. It was really actually at some point when we were all struggling to figure out what are we going to do with this piece. We started looking at virtual reality and augmented reality and gaming, and then Subin's working on another project for Tish that is using spatialized audio, and he and I were talking about that a little bit, and then the light bulbs went off a little bit, and he came on board as a sound designer. He's also a composer in his own right, and I think that's important. So I want to first start talking about the creative impulse of the sound design. And Subin, if you could talk about, some of the conversations that you and Coco and Sxip had about the intentions and about how you interpreted that and sort of your role creatively and how your own vision kind of came into this final piece.
Thank you very much, Sxip. Regarding the creative process, I think it all started with the concept of the real gauntlet, the actual gauntlet where the choir is around you and the audience member is walking past and you hear these individual voices, as Sxip mentioned before. So because we can't do that right now, we thought, how about the listener stay still and the choir go past around you, and have give the listener a treat. So that is how it all started, and then it kind of evolved. Sxip and I usually, we've told this many a times. This was not planned, but it was evolving, and the whisper storm. It's one of my favorite things. You don't actually hear the whisper of like 20 people across your whispering into your ears, swirling around your head in a whisper storm. So that is something that couldn't have happened in a real world scenario, but there we are in a virtual world, and I think this Gauntlet has evolved, I should say.
So talk to me then now about translating that. I think that reversal was really key, about instead of the audience moving through it, that you would move the singers through in this post-production form. And I think one of the things that's amazing about, choirs are one of the most elemental experiences of someone standing in the middle of a group of people singing. It's similar to, we were talking last night, many of us around Theater for One, which is theater and storytelling. It's really elemental forms, but then technology is sort of underneath in a super invisible but really intricate way. So I'm wondering if you could be a little bit of Toto, I guess, or Dorothy. I think it was Toto who pulled the curtain away from the wizard and revealed some of the tricks that were behind. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about actually how did you do this, right? What was happening in this program where you were able to hear singers all around you and above and below you, and what was that all about?
Thanks to this wonderful program called Spat Revolution by a company called Flux Immersive. So this is Spat Revolution. It's easier to show you. So this is our listener, and these are our singers. So there's Eliza, Casper, Vera, Shailina, Yasmina, and they are all around you. And if I can start playing, this is I Am a Foreigner project. So there's Aisel singing right in front of you, and the rest of the choir. So these are the people who are singing at the moment. So they are walking across and singing. And this wonderful program, I'm such a big fan of it. So you can see that it's not just a 2D space, but it's a 3-dimensional space. So we have these ghost voices of Yasmina. She has got like one note singing, and it's coming off like from a height, and some are coming from underneath the listener. So you get a kind of 3-dimensional feel of the voices around you. And I think that's it. I'm gonna stop my screen share.
Great. I think what's so interesting is Sxip said earlier about this idea of touching every bit of sound, which I think felt like a metaphor earlier, but then when you see the program, you actually start to sort of understand what that means and where all of those pieces of sound, and it is about it's about placing the voice in space and in time and in distance, right?
Yeah, that's very true. I come from a live sound engineering background. This was kind of very new approach to me, but very intuitive. You just place the sound in the space around you. just like how a conductor would place an orchestra, or like to get the best sound. So this was kind of like orchestrating voices and in the space, so it felt natural. um, and like Sxip said before, like he was doing all the editing, and these are like little plants that you plant in the garden. and, and I'm so glad that I was also a part of this gardening process.
It's so beautiful. You grew a beautiful garden. And Sxip, I think there was some point where you started comparing this to, I guess, like the way that a bluegrass band would record, right? Around a conical
Oh, well,
speaker.
I was, yeah, well, probably not even bluegrass bands, but when we were recording in mono on discs and early records, they just had a recording cone in the room, and it was attached to a needle, and it would vibrate on, as sound went into the cone, it would physically vibrate the needle on whatever they were recording onto. So if you wanted to do a band, you put the bass player closest to the cone, then the singer, and then the piano player probably here, and the percussionist way back in the room, and you'd space people. So the mix of instruments would be really good, all going physically through a cone to a needle. And this is like that. Like there was no EQ back then, and we maybe once or twice slightly EQ'd something, but you don't EQ in this space. You just place things where you want, so it blends well together. In the same way, if I was gonna, you had a bluegrass band live in a room, you don't EQ every instrument. You can't. They're playing live. It's like that. So it's all about placement in this virtual space, rather than going, I'm going to cut out this frequency so the kick drum comes through. And like, so it's a very different, it's a contemporary recording process, but it harkens back to the first recording process.
Great. Well, it's a really beautiful job. Congratulations, Subin. Thank you for that. We're starting to get short on time, so I'm going to move to, we've got a couple of questions from the audience. So the first one comes from Mary, hopefully I'm not mispronouncing your name, who asks, Coco and Sxip, how did you determine the flow and sequence of the different parts and the different movements and the length of the final composition? So what was the kind of, how did you take all of this different information and create a musical structure out of it?
It's based on the live gauntlets. Like it's really good just to hear a normal choral piece at the end, a unison sung thing. And we've always done it in unison, though this time we did in harmony. So I knew that would come at the end. You want the more experimental parts, which were the tonal talking in the middle, and you want something that is fresh, but you can follow easily. And so we did I Am a Foreigner, which has traditional melodies, but in the surround situation. So it's actually very much like the gauntlets we did at Sydney Opera House and Rockefeller Center, that has different formational movements.
Yeah, there's a sense of like, I think the second gauntlet in Norway, it was cold, it was performed in December, and I had the idea to like give someone a warm hand and guide them through the gauntlet, even if I had to put like hand warmers in my hands. And so creating the piece, I think there's still a sense of like, how do you curate someone's experience? How do you take their hand and bring them through the experience?
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you. Now, Lily has a question about the creative process. We've been doing a lot of arts chats with our Career Development Center about how do you continue the creative impulse in the midst of COVID and everything else that people are facing. So she asks, how did you maintain the motivation to create this piece with so much happening every day?
This is probably unfair because it's not a good answer for everyone, but if I have a creative impulse no matter what, which is why being an artist is my job. And that's it. Like, I can't stop. So, and if there's a hole, then I'm a less functioning person. So it's my way of breathing through the world.
Yeah. But I think that there was a moment where I felt really grateful that we had put in the work for what this work was. Like, it already had a sense of a formula with like the movement interviews, and then how we did it. We had already done the work to create like the formula for creating the work. And so when times were really hard and I was emotionally spent, or you know, we also have a child who might wake up any moment, like, and it was like when it was really like when I was exhausted, I could lean back onto the form that I had already created, that I trusted worked. And I love to say this thing about the work that I make, because there was one day when I realized, you know, I want to make art and work that I love, that loves me back. And I think what I meant when I came up with that thought was like, I want to be supported by the things I make as much as I have to kind of support and nurture the things I make. And I felt that like there was definitely some times, like Bill mentioned, I started the movement interviews about a week after George Floyd's death. And so it's very powerful to me that the trial's going on right now as we premiere the piece. And there was a part of the experience of being in the US and then doing these movement interviews with people in the UAE where like I was so emotionally torn and spent, and there was so much happening, and I leaned back into the forum and I listened, and I did the movement interviews, and it gave me so much, and so I hope that answers.
Well, and I think for both of us, when I came to New York and I met artists at first, anyway, I was like, wow, they're not doing art for the reason I'm doing art. I'm like, oh, why am I doing art? What I came up with for me is art as a tool for living, meaning it's this tool, and you don't, you know, if you need to put up a painting on the wall, a hammer is always a good tool. You could do it in other ways. You could freeze a pumpkin, and that's an interesting way to put a nail in the wall, but a hammer still is a really good tool. And I have that practicality. It's like, and for her, so I think what we're both saying in a way is, for us, art's a tool that we use every single day. So it's not a question of being inspired to pick up the hammer. It's like, you're like, oh, I need to put the painting on the wall, I'm going to use the hammer. So I think if you have a relationship with your art that's that practical, you don't need inspiration, because it's just like a fork or a knife or a hammer or a glass. It's something you use to get through the day, to move through the day.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I felt from the Art Center too. I think my immediate mode was just to really kind of lean in, because there's so much else. This is what we do. This is the thing we can hold on to, and that can drive you through, sometimes allowing you to compartmentalize as much as you need. Sometimes I think in the period of this, actually allowing you to contend with all of the things that are actually happening, giving you an opportunity to process it. I think we've got time for, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, like, to that end, like, also, we weren't in a bubble. The Art Center was supporting us through the process and really helped. Like, Bill and everyone at the Art Center was like helping guide us through this process. They did not let us drop the ball once. They were an integral
especially
part
like Chris
of it.
And Chris Pye, like, you know, and Claire
and Subin and Lindsay. Like, we were not in a bubble making art. We're in a community making art.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I will encourage people, if you haven't downloaded the program, there's a reason why all these people are listed at the ends of programs, because there's so many people whose work and whose hands are involved in making this. There were 20 people whose voices and whose words were part of it, and there were the singers. So I do encourage you to download the program, read it, acknowledge all the people there. And I'm going to just ask one more question, which is about all the people who are part of making it. And this is from Smriti, who says a few of her friends' voices are in the piece. And she was curious about the process for searching for the actual voices in the piece. So I know that they were all part of the NYUAD choir, but then you had to sort of cast what text goes with what voice, right? So if you could talk a little bit about how you do that matchmaking, and who's singing what, and who's saying what story, and I know
that's
sometimes
really interesting.
Genders and all those things. Yeah.
Well, you know, it's interesting with an orchestra. You want to have different timbres. You want to have, like, we want to have the nasally oboe, and we want to have the soft, open French horn. but but there's consistency in each section because we know how to build an oboe and what it's going to sound like. We know what a French horn is going to sound like. We know what a kettle drum is going to sound like. But with choirs, each person's voice is so different that we don't go, okay, this is going to be the Tom Waits section and everybody's going to sing with a gravelly voice. And this is going to be the operatic section. And this is going to be the Appalachian section. Like, we don't do that. And I've thought for a long time, what if we did do that? But voices are so different that it would be hard to create the consistency, though I still want to try this. But so what happens is you have two things. You want to go, okay, this singer always sings in tune and always is really consistent. So I can go through and I pretty much know this singer is going to hit all their notes. But this singer always, every time this singer speaks, it's so interesting. So I'm going to grab their voice. Or every time this singer sings, it's so interesting. So I'm going to push their voice forward in this section like we did with Eliza, because you're just going to listen. So it's a balance of going, what are the reliable sounds and what are the interesting sounds? And every single person made an interesting sound. There's one moment where every single singer shines. I can point, I'm like, oh, I used them here because they did this interesting thing. So in that way, it's more like filmmaking. You know, you shoot a scene, and you're like, oh, the actor did this interesting thing here. So it's always what's consistency versus what's interesting. Sometimes they commingle, and sometimes you just grab, the consistency, or you grab the interesting aspect.
And for me, I mean, I have this sort of the rare experience of having done the movement interviews and knowing where the stories came from, who said them, and I try, like, sometimes when Sxip asks me for my advice on who should say what, I think about who said the story initially, and sometimes I try to almost steer the opposite, like if it's really powerful to hear different people tell very personal stories from someone else, and I think it is an instrument.
Yeah.
And I think that idea of the intimacy and the personal nature of the stories, but yet the universality of them, and the fact that story can move into somebody else's voice who's a different age, who's from a different nationality, who's a different gender, can bring something else to it. And I think,
well, and I think the Gauntlet as a form, it inherently demands empathy. Like especially when you're passing tones, you really have to listen. And even in this form, because we really had the longer stories than other people, it kind of like the form goes, I need you to listen with empathy, and I need you to sing with empathy.
Yeah, it's funny. So a friend of mine texted me during the performance and said, has Sxip ever worked with Toshi Regan? Like, they should be doing something. And as you're talking about empathy, I'm thinking about that comment and about Parable of the Sower, which is part of our Art Center origin myth. So I just want to thank you both. I want to thank Subin and Clare and all of the singers from the choir and all of the people who did the movement interviews and everybody at the Art Center. I'm so proud of this piece. I hope that everyone who listened tonight will go back and listen. If you listened in the dark in your room, I hope you take Coco's embodied listening suggestions and maybe go out and listen in a public space. Listen at the gym, listen in a public plaza. Go back and listen in your room, listen in the bathtub, make sure you don't have the electrical supply too close, but just spend some time with it. I think the piece is really, really rich and really rewards delving into all of those layers. And thank you so much for creating this for the Art Center, for Abu Dhabi, for the UAE, and for the world.
Thank you
And so much.
So much thanks to the Art Center. I was in the middle of this, and everybody involved, Claire and Chris and Subin and Lana and Jen and Bernice and you and Lindsay, I felt like we got lucky. We got the exact, but it's probably good initial curation for whatever you're doing as an art center in life. But I'm like, wow, we got the exact right people to pull this crazy thing off. Like, and I mean that deeply. I kept going, how did we get so lucky to be able to get this specific group of people? They're all pushing in the right places for this to happen. So thank you.
Thank you, Cal.
Great. Well, thank you both. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We hope that we'll see you at Manifold New Sounds of 2021 on Monday and Theater for One from Wednesday through Sunday. A week from now, where you can be in an audience of one with the performer and have that same sense of intimacy. And have a great night. Good night.
Take care.